today's edition of Politics 101. We're doing a special today, an independence special. As you know, yesterday Guyana celebrated its 55th independence anniversary. And so we thought that today we would do some reflections on independence. We have quite a pack lineup tonight. So stay tuned and share the link so that others would know that we have started. Independence, of course, came after 128 years um, after emancipation. It came 128 years after emancipation. Emancipation was meant to be independence, but of course, it was delayed for another century and more as we entered the era of colonialism. In many regards, was a glorified form of enslavement. We had, in the interim, we had indentureship, where our brothers and sisters, East Indian, Chinese, and Portuguese brothers and sisters came under that system, which itself was a system based on bondage, bonded labor. And so when independence came in 1966, it came after a long struggle, long struggle against uh, human bondage. Our independence came in the 1960s, at a time when the world itself was gripped in what became known as the Cold War. We became independent at a time when those who were the victors of the Second World War had gotten together in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and came up with a new world order. And that new world order catered for the world at that time. And the world at that time was the big countries in Europe and North America, Guyana and the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean, most of Africa did not exist. They weren't sovereign countries. And so we became independent at a time when the world was not created for us. We entered a world that was not created for us. We entered a world where the two superpowers ensured that the world was divided between the two spheres of influence. And here we were coming from colony that produced everything to produce wealth for Europe and produce nothing for itself. The challenge was how to turn a plantation into a nation within the context of the Cold War and the New World Order. And internally, we had our challenges because the coming of independence introduced a new competition for political power between and among our ethnic groups. As the Europeans were leaving, the question that was put on the table was who would govern? And the second question was what kind of governance we would go into independence with. The ethnic question rose its head, and the multi-ethnic nationalist movement that came to prominence in 1953 and threatened the very world order that Britain and the rest of the victors of the Second World War had put in place. Guyana wanted to be free. Guyanese wanted to be free. The nationalist, multi-ethnic PPP wanted to begin that process of freedom. And that process was halted after just 133 days because that multi-ethnic PPP raised the question of total freedom from colonial rule, and it did so against the backdrop of a united political movement. That movement was split in 1955, followed by another split in 1956. And by the time we get to the turn of the 1960s, our country had descended into warfare. That ethnic warfare will last from 1961 to 1964. And so by the time we got to independence, our nation had developed ethnic suspicions and ethnic divisions. And that was our biggest internal challenge. We had the challenge of turning a monoculture economy where we produce one product, sugar, turning that economy into a viable modern economy. And so we had internal challenges and external challenges. But amidst all of that, the expectancy of freedom still filled the air. I remember as a little boy seeing aunt and the neighbors and the villagers witnessing joy that came to their faces and their hearts. Some of them cried. They wrapped their head, the ladies. The steel band was on the truck. Independence had come. It had come to Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica in 1962. And so the expectancy was there. So I give that introduction to make the point that independence is a serious thing. The Independence Project is a serious project because we would learn very quickly that independence was not a moment, it was a process. It was a transition from centuries of bondage to a state of freedom. In the United States of America, as African Americans came out of slavery, the white supremacists there raised the point whether the dark people, the black people, could exist in a state of freedom. And that question also arose when the British and the other European colonial powers had to hand over their colonies to a free people. We had won that freedom in 1838. So colonialism was what freedom delayed. Freedom delayed. And so the question whether we could exist in a state of freedom, the success of our independence project would answer that question as far as the Europeans were concerned. For us in Guyana, it was not a question of whether we could exist in a state of freedom. We existed in a state of freedom before we were brought to these shores. And so it was a question of us formally holding the reins that would manage this new era of freedom. And so we want to talk about that tonight. We want to talk about what independence means, what it meant to some people who were back then. My first panel is made up of Kemraj Ramjatan, who is no stranger, doesn't need any introduction. Hamilton Green, who was there at Independence. I don't know if Mr. Lewis is on yet, but Hamilton Green was there very much in the thick of things as we became independent in 1966. And he's still around. In the interim, he served in many capacities in government. Today, he's an elder statesman who continues to ring the bell of nationhood. Ami Kemraj, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Hamilton, I hope I have not misrepresented what independence meant in 1966 and still mean today. You were there in 1966. You were part of the PNCUF government. You did not go with them to England with the negotiations, but I imagine you were very much part of the strategizing for independence. Give the audience a sense of what 1966 was like. What was the feeling of Guyana at that time?
Well, David, first of all, thanks for this program. I think I will label it an effort to educate our people so that the flag we hoisted in May 1966 will be meaningful. The anthem we sang will have the ring of authentic freedom, and that over the next few months and years, we should ring the bell of real liberation. We are still to achieve those two objectives of real freedom and liberation. But to answer your question, one has to examine, and this is where our young people need to be advised. What was the environment in 1953 when the suspension came, and what was the environment before? George Orwell, in October of 1946, coined the term Cold War when he quite accurately suggested that with nuclear weapons, the world will face tremendous challenges and conflicts between the two superpowers. The next year, Sir Winston Churchill talked about the Iron Curtain at a conference in Westminster in the United States. That caused, in short, our suspension in 1953. It is in that environment that we got independence in 1966. It was not an easy road. We had to tread very carefully, and Forbes Burnham did a magnificent job because at that time, the powerful forces were unwilling, as is the case of British Guiana, to have, as they said, turn Guyana into a communist state. So that as 1966 came, I remember very vividly because as General Secretary of the party at the time, we were very excited about preparations. And we had planned to have Kwame Nkrumah being sort of a special guest in May 1966. But in February, thanks to the depth and problems of the Cold War, with the CIA, he was toppled in the coup in February on his way to solve problems in Vietnam. He was in China at the time. So when we got independence, we were very conscious of the intensity of the Cold War and that we should walk a very careful path so that that flag and anthem will mean something to our people and succeeding generations. We have not yet achieved that. And I believe that the message today, the effort today, should be to say to our people, whether it's Chino, Indo, Porto, Afro-Guyanese, that unless we work together, the old divide and rule policy of the imperialists would prevail. We see this happening with oil. We see it happening with the use of our resources. And too often, I worry that while the two major groups, as one man said, like yard fowls, the real enemy is out there pontificating, telling us how to run elections, offering advice. Because at the end of the day, they're not interested in us being the beneficiaries of our God-given natural resources. And so this program, I hope, will concentrate on using examples of our past, the failed revolutions, 1741, 1742, 1743, 1763, 1823, and the whole bundle of it, the problems in 1953 and beyond. I hope, therefore, that this program will provide the basis to say to this and succeeding generations, we've got to work together if we are to make independence something that is truly magnificent and real, and not merely a flag, an anthem, and a constitution. As my friend said, I think Dr. Yesu Prasad, very wise words. We came in different ships. Today, we are all in the same boat. Let us pick up our paddles and paddle to glory and goodness, and say to the outsiders, as we should say to all those people, we are at one. So long as we are divided, as we are, our independence will remain a dream. An independence where even our purported leaders seem to have more confidence in the advice, open inverted commas, of those who enslaved us and brought us here as laborers. Things have not changed. The leopard never changes its spots. And I believe, David, that we should concentrate in persuading our people that different as we are, we have different skin color, different texture of hair, came from different parts of the world, that fortuitously we are here. And to put aside this arrogance, which is now apparent on behalf of some people, that they're not going to succeed. The lessons of slavery tells us of disunity.
Okay. Yeah. Hamilton Green,
So that is
former
my
Prime Minister.
hope as we discuss the program.
Yes, former Prime Minister Hamilton Green Kemraj, come in. You are a generation after Hamilton Green. We were boys in 1966, but now, as you look back, how have we done on this independence project? If the objective, as Hamilton Green says, was liberation and freedom. And then the context, the international context, global context, and the local context. When you take all of that into consideration, how have we done? Your song.
You hearing me now?
Yes, we get in, you know.
Yeah. Let me say that history sometimes can be very unforgiving, and the narratives can go either way. But one thing for sure is that all the political parties, the entire citizenry of Guyana in 1966, in my opinion, and I would be regarded as what Salman Rushdie talk about the Indians, midnight's children, as it were. But having read and having heard the stories from my Aja and Nana, and then my father, and then, of course, doing my own reading, I thought that it was an extraordinarily great day for freedom, liberation, and to be with the dignity of a free country, as it were. We still had the Queen then, but in a couple of years after, we had the Republic of Guyana. And I thought that in that journey, and I still think it was extraordinarily good and right, a thing that the leaders of those days did. First of all, independence, and then, notwithstanding, some can say the sordid affairs prior to it. But when the journey commenced, we did not know what will happen. Just like India as the first country in the Commonwealth, and so many others in Caribbean and Africa and so on. And we had to ask the question, as like I love to say, the questioner asked the leaders, where is the pathway that we will now walk? Good leadership demanded that the answer must be, by walking, we will create the pathway. Because there was none. We were ideologized by all the concepts of the British as to how to govern. We looked upon their rule of law in the judiciary as to how we're going to set the examples. Our civic system, public service, was based on what Britain had. And it was not that it was bad. Our executive branch, in a sense, also patterned and mimicked that which was from Britain. And so our umbilical cords were there. And as I said, it was not bad. But we also had a duty. And I think that that duty is being performed, some will say marginally, some will say not marginally, some will be saying that it is not being performed at all. But whatever the narrative, I think our leaders of today are ensuring that we understand what happened in the past and to ensure that we make it clear to even the next generation that we have to break from the institutional tentacles of years before so that we can have that which is far more visionary as methods of government, as methods of governance that can ensure that we move apace. We just can't go back making disastrous decisions as a result of those tentacles that hold us back. History has that kind of enslaving attribute about it. It pulls you back all the time. I see it today, generations after, going back to what happened in the 55 and 60s and so on. I said, well, fine, whatever happened then, we now have to move on. And so I feel that we have moved on exceptionally well. We have been an extraordinarily resilient people, notwithstanding ethnicities, religious differences, and so on, notwithstanding political wars, as it were. We have not, when compared to other countries, done badly, and we must be proud of it. When I watch this BBC and the CNN as to what's happening in Palestine and the Middle East and the other countries, and even next to Russia and even around the Caribbean here, we see that we are really doing well, notwithstanding the fact that we could do far better. But that is but the journey undone, which we as walkers must create a path to. I think that best expresses my view on this 55th anniversary. And for all those Guyanese who I haven't as yet said happy anniversary to you.
And comrades, you are so correct. At the end of the day, we have survived.
Absolutely.
And we have survived the harsh global environment that we had to deal with. We have survived. We talk about the ethnic challenges, but one challenge that we have not talked about is the ideological challenge within, where the sons and daughters of those fathers who took and mothers who took government at the time of independence. Remember, in our case, it was Forbes Burnham as education minister who made it possible for Walter Rodney to go to QC. And 20 years later, the son was challenging the father, And the big question was what should the content of independence be? And we slug it out. Ami was on one side, young person were on the other side, within the PPP. You guys have that kind of ideology. Right. We survived it. Today, someone from the PPP, the WPA, the PNC, they were all part of a government just a year ago. And I think that coalition government, for me, represented the best example since independence of what we could be.
Absolutely.
What we could be. And despite its errors, I think it has left us a blueprint on the way going forward. Hamilton Green, comment on that. Your sound. You have to turn on your sound. We're not hearing you, Ami.
You hearing me?
I'm hearing you now.
I share your views. The big problem we face is to effectuate change in the mindset of some of our purported leaders. No matter what constitutional adjustments you make, if those at the helm are not wedded to the concept of authentic justice, fairness, and have a passion for being Guyanese from top to bottom, we are not going to move as quickly as we should. And for me, we need to persuade our political leaders that they have got to come out of this mindset. First of all, the winner-take-all concept is not going to work. It didn't work, and it will not work. The winner-take-all produces a situation where the real enemies take advantage of that division, and at the end of the day, we are not the major beneficiaries of the God-given treasures that we have in this country. So I agree with you. The coalition was a step forward, but we need to go one step further to ensure that coalition members, PP members, opposition, or what have you, have a change of mind, a change of attitude that divests them of this foolishness of arrogance and to feeling that once you win a government, whether it's by 1 or 2 seats, you can ignore the other half of the population.
Comrades, winner take all, the coalition as a blueprint, but we need to go one step further. Your song, yes.
Totally.
Bearing, you know.
There are lots of things that we have to do, but at the larger level, it is to restore a commitment to the common good by all of our leaders. That is fundamental. The more I read, the more I watch Guyana's politics, the more that I'm a participant in it, I have come around to the strong decision that if there isn't that restoration and complete commitment for the common good of Guyana, we will not go anywhere. And what I've also realized too, and I'll tell you, is that it requires a huge amount of trust in the leaders that influence the ordering of this society. And quite frankly, we still need that kind of consensus, notwithstanding that today there is that mighty shortage of it. What we need to is that consensus coming not only from political leaders. Sometimes we like to put all the blame on political leaders. No, it got to happen within the trade union movement, especially at this time. The business people, the university, even right down to the little clubs that we have in and around Georgetown, and the other forms of organizations, structures that we have. Everybody would have to understand that we must dig deeper into this trust pool so that we can always tolerate that which is different from us, whether ethnically, whether at the logical and the skeptical, intellectual sense, and so on, and to listen to the other. We live in too many bubbles here, a couple of bubbles we have, and we like to just stay in and not want to venture forth. I would want to say that I have ventured forth. I have busted the bubbles, people say, from within the PPP, and I've gone out and I've done at least a coalition without my other party members and so on. And we have done something that created a beautiful experiment from 2015 to 2020. Socially cohesive exhibition, as it were. And more Guyanese doing that will help.
Hami, you are almost a fundamental member of the PPP, the old PPP, and you are certainly a founder member of the PNC. You're now an elder statesman. You've had your fights, you've had your battles, you've served your party, you've served your country. Now we're at this juncture where I would argue that we have a convergence of a recolonization scheme, subtle though it is, and the effect that it has had on political parties. As your party tried to regroup the PNC, what advice would you give to the younger party members on this 55th anniversary of independence?
I have already spoken to a number of young people.
Yeah.
And as I said, tomorrow I'll be talking to them again about these two, as I call them, twin courses, the suspension and the split. I repeat what I said earlier. We need to cultivate a cadre of young people who will delink themselves from the hatred and the suspicion of their parents and their grandparents. It's not easy, but I believe if they understand the prize of a truly good Guyana, one that you talked about where we are being recolonized, if we give them the intellectual energy to understand they have got to carry the struggle. Old folks like myself, we can advise and give guidance and tell them about our past so we don't make those same mistakes. After the demise of Forbes Burnham, as one who as a teenager walked the streets with Jagan and Burnham in 52, 53, and took part in the struggle, took part in the problems after the suspension. We had to bury literature and all sorts of things. I, after Burnham's demise, publicly said that what we needed most, and some people took it lightly, was a moral and a spiritual revival at all levels. As Kemrat said, not only politicians, but civic society, young people, women and men. And this is the big challenge we face. How do we get people to change their attitudes, their responses to given situation? How do we get them to understand that unity is vital? How do we get them, once they are in office, to not indulge in any improper behavior, as we see it happening throughout the years? How it is we can get our ministers, our people in office, to govern in the interest of the people and not try to accumulate wealth. These are the things we must talk about openly. Explain the racial thing and don't sweep it under the carpet. It is real. I grew up in All Boys Town, and at that time, the problem was between Hindus and Muslims. My father had a drugstore. Almost every day he had to settle disputes. But after a certain event, it became Indo-Guyanese versus Afro-Guyanese. A sad situation which has been a curse. We've got to cure that. And I think we can do it. The young generation must take the lead. We've got to give them information. We've got to tell them the mistakes we made. the time wasted in fighting, and that we need to work together. And to repeat myself, to avoid being recolonized by those people who still regard us as their inferior.
Cameron, as we close off this first segment, because we have a panel of young people coming up, you have not just talked the talk about racial and ethnic solidarity. You have done it by example. You broke with your party on a matter or matters of principle, and you are demonstrating to Guyanese what it is to work with people who were once your adversaries. Any regrets? Your son.
It was an extremely difficult decision, but I realized that it was the correct decision. And I did not want to wait too long. I had to get some persuasion from my other party, AFC leaders, and I am very glad and grateful for that. Because, I find that what had happened is that really the moral fiber of our society had been weakened. But quite frankly, it wasn't destroyed. We still have tremendous hope. And so we have to now engage that young set as we are talking about here, so that they can be more involved as active participants, the young people of Guyana, this generation, the now 20, 18-year-olds and so on, so that we can, protect the truths that have happened over the years, appreciate the logic of where we're going to move towards, and so that we can combat lies that could be to our detriment and their detriment. And we must do that with a self-introspection, because if we do it that way, David, we are going to put them in a trajectory, in a direction that is also false. So we got a lot of statement to make as to what went wrong. Because, look, we are not the wisest of the lot. The great America got so much of trouble. You go and listen to the TV, you can see what kind of trouble they got. But we now have to ensure that we are wise and honest enough to ensure that there is an active participation. And one big point I would wish, especially for the young generation, is a civic education. I'm thinking more about it, what it is that we have to teach them. Not just geometry and biology and physics and added maths and all kind of thing. And some of them get 21 subjects, but when you ask them about Guyana's history, Guyana's peoples and so on, they know nothing much. Some of them, I noticed one of my family members got about 13 subjects, but you ask him to go and pick up a bat and ball, the fella can't pick up the bat properly. That is what I mean. We must be rounded to the extent of understanding our history, understand that there are people of other ethnicities, what they like, their appreciations, their values. And when you will come around to it, you will know that we are all human. And that is what's going to take us forward. That's the pathway that will be provided.
We are all human. What it is to be human, certainly independence asks that question. Cameron Ramjatan, Hamilton Green, thank you all very much for starting us off. We have a big lineup tonight, and we have got to get you back to come and to let's talk biography, because you have a lot to teach. Your own experience is going to be part of that civic education that Kemraj is talking about. It's not just about the theory of government and the theory of politics, action, and you have been there. Brothers, thank you all very much.
Thanks, and a very good...
Thanks. And as we move on to our next panel, the question that was raised there is whether the hurdle of taking us beyond our ethnic divisions, overcoming those hurdles, is now the greatest task of the present generation. We'll find that out from them, how they feel about that, with the next panel that is coming up. I have on that panel Ganesh Maipal, one of the young rising stars on the coalition side. Ganesh, welcome. Darren Wade, another young rising star. I never thought I would use those words describing politics, but we live in an age of stardom and so forth. And Darren and Ganesh are part of this new generation of young people who are advancing our politics. And Tabitha Sarbo Ali, who is a member of parliament, as Ganesh is, lady, gentlemen, sister, brothers, welcome to Politics 101.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for having us.
And you would have heard the conversation with Hamilton Green and Kemraj Ramjatan. Independence came in 1966.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Darren. Independence came in 1966. And some people grew up with independence. Some of us are the grandchildren of independence. And you all are really the great-grandchildren of independence. And I want to start off by asking you all the question, each of you, what does independence mean to you? Ganesh, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hines. Thank you for having me on your program. I don't know if I am the great-grandchild of independence, perhaps the great-great-grandchild of independence. But, you know, I was born in the year 1989. And that alone tells you how young I am. But I was fortunate to grow up in a political home. So the talk about independence, the talk about a Republican state, the talk about the love for country, and the talk about how we struggled as a people to reach where we are was always an environment that I dwelled in. So for me, independence is something sacred. And it is something that when I read history, I listen to my father and grandfather talk about it and what is it that they went through and so on. I am very much, it really touches me to know how our nation had to fight for independence first of all, but it hurts me even more knowing that I'm living in a period where majority of our people, the younger generation, those that fit in my category, don't understand what really is independence. But I would like to say that I am trying my utmost, and I know that my other colleagues here and also some other educated young people who furthered their study and interacted in different areas and with different people get that sense of understanding the importance of independence and what it means to build a nation and what it means to basically have love for country, because preserving this is really for the future generation and ensuring that we leave a mark that is better than where my father left it for me is what is important for me. Thank you.
Building a nation is what independence means to Ganesh Maipal. Darren Wade, what does independence mean to you and what it should mean to your generation? Darren? While we await Darren, Tabitha, I pose the same question to you. What does independence mean to you as an individual and to your generation?
Can you? Oh, my apologies.
Tabitha, go ahead.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Good evening again. As I listen to even what came before when Kemraj and Hamilton Green, when they were speaking, and even Ganesh. I am in a very interesting place right now, dealing with independence, dealing with where we are as a country, and trying to find how it is we move forward given our current circumstance. And as we celebrate 55 years, you question, the decisions made by those who came before that have us where we are. On the one hand, independence is necessary, self-government, self-rule. That is, you need to start there. Without independence, then someone else is deciding and determining your entire future and the future of of your generations, and that is never a place where anyone would want to be. So, in that vein, you welcome the whole those that came before, that fought and ensured that we had independence, and ensure that we're in a place where we can meet and hopefully continue to meet to determine how it is we should move forward as a country, with all of us, the different races, different ethnicities that are here. But even as I am working through 55 years, I can't feel but a bit sad as to where we are. On the one hand, I hear and I agree with Kemraj that we are not doing bad when you compare to other countries, but on the other hand, we're doing worse when you compare to some other countries that got independence around the same time as us. And as a young person, it is really something to grapple with. The decisions that we made when we made those decisions in the past, the impact it is having on us now, and the decisions that our leaders are making now, and how that will impact us generations to come. As we look at 55 years, there's more to be desired. We as a people should require more, should expect more of those who we place all our trust in to govern the country, to lead us through this independence experiment, so to speak. And so as I go through everything that has been transpiring of late and looking at 55 years, a lot more could have been, we could have been a lot further along. But of course, independence, of course, is the starting point. And you have to celebrate it, because without it, then this sort of conversations would not be happening. Because somebody else in another country would have been determining, where we are and where we should be going.
Thank you, Tabitha. And you raised some very important questions there. First of all, the question of questioning independence. We've had a long history of that. The generation after the Hamilton Green, Burnham, Guyana, Dragon generation, I'm talking about the Walter Rodney generation, they questioned independence, and it led to that clash of ideas. My generation came on the tail end, and we questioned independence. And you're correct. Part of what makes independence this living thing is our ability to question its content, its character, and its tenor. And perhaps you're right, your generation is now challenged with raising the question anew. What should independence mean in 2021? Darren Wade, you can come in now.
Thank you, Brother Hines, Dr. Hines.
Brother's fine.
For this question. I will try my best not to give the textbook definition of what independence means. If I could get some of the lyrics, the opening of that song, Zimbabwe, I know you know that song very, very well, or a great philosopher, Bob Marley, at Zimbabwe with independence, where he said every man has a right to determine his own destiny. And I believe that is what independence should mean. That's yes, whereby we are able to look after our own business, whereby we as a people could sit down and have mature discussion, whereby our resources are equitable and equally distributed among our peoples. And and one thing, no more internal power struggle. But I believe in Guyanese context, we have been unable to get rid of the internal power struggles that we have over the years. Whether it was the our comrade leader, as we say in the PNC, Barnum era, Kelly Jagan era, even with the WP. Over the years, it has been a political struggle in Guyana. And I believe our leaders already are unable at this point, or there's an unwillingness of that struggle. And I believe that is what is keeping us back as a country. You know, we at times we exploit our diversity rather than to use it as a strength. And you know, the external powers, again, you know, that Bob Marley song is so apt. You know, the external power oftentimes use, you know, our issues to take advantage on us. So for me, that we could, you know, determine our own destiny, determine our future as a people, as result our resources and so forth. Because before then, the Europeans, the imperials, basically use our resources to their benefit, fostering their growth, and at the same time, underdeveloping this part of the world, this part of the hemisphere. Yes, so so it's critical as we go forward in the future that we have mature discussions, you know.
Yes. Darren, thank you very much. And Bob Marley wrote that song for Zimbabwe independence in 1980 when he was invited to be a guest along with heads of government. Every man got a right to decide his own destiny. And in this judgment day, there is no partiality. So arm in arms, we fight this little struggle. Because that's the only way we will overcome our little struggle. No more internal power struggle. We come together to overcome this little trouble. Soon we'll find out who is the real revolutionary, because I don't want my people to be contrary. I don't want my people to be contrary. Ganesh Maipaul, Bob Marley, they're invoking, as Darren says, the essence of what independence means. Your colleague, Tabitha, raised the question about questioning independence with the hope of, in a sense, bringing together a new independence covenant that your generation will be comfortable with. Your generation cannot be responsible for the mistakes of the other generation, but you have to be responsible for your own your own entanglement with this independence project. What do you think, Danish, in 2021 is the most pressing need of our independence project?
Dr. Hines, I understand clearly why Tabitha is holding the view of questioning this independence. And I hold the same view because what was supposed to happen when we gained independence to now did not happen. Instead, there was a greater act of dividing our people. There were greater acts of separating us from understanding our true essence as Guyanese. And there was this focus on Afro and Indo. And there was this focus on loving India and loving Africa as opposed to loving Guyana. And I think that is a fundamental reason why we as Guyanese at this current stage in our lives are questioning this whole independence and this independence project, as Tabitha would have put it. The thing is, what can cause us to become more effective as Guyanese so that we can walk the path of ensuring that our country reaches its true potential and achieving what we would like to achieve without having obstacles is really education. Education is perhaps the most important tool in removing this thinking that I am for myself and my kind, and Tabitha must be for herself and her kind. Removing that scorn, removing that thought requires us to dig deeper into education, investing more into education. And when I say education, I'm not talking about academic education alone. I am talking about us advancing co-curricular and extracurricular activities that help to nurture a child better, promoting sports where people that are of different races can coexist peacefully, having more activities where you leave your homes and you go in camps and you participate in lecture series and the like. You expose the young people to a different surrounding, because our country as we know it, most of our villages, they are concentrated with particular racial groupings. So you would have a place like Denhamstel in Region 3 that is Afro, that is at a base of Afro, and you have Lenora just next door, but a base of Indo. And the problem I have in today's society is how much do these villages, how much do they interact with each other to understand each other's culture, understand each other's way of life, understand where they came from, understand and have an appreciation for what they're understanding at the same time. So I would say, Dr. Hines, that with education, we can rid or mitigate this scorn that we have right now and advancing or walking towards the direction of a more developed country and having a greater appreciation for where we came from and what are the struggles that brought us here, and also participating in this togetherness of building this nation. Education will play that role. And again, I reiterate, I am not talking about only academic education. I am talking about the whole aspect of other forms of education. And look at it, Dr. Hines, if I may engage you a little further. Look at it how it has happened with people who are educated. You seldomly find people who are educated going down this road of divisive behavior, of having or not having an appreciation for the other race or the other culture. And if you do find people who do it, hear me loud and clear, if you do find people who are doing it, they are doing it for their own personal and selfish gain. They're not doing it as a genuine something in them, but they're doing it because they want to achieve, they have a motive that they would like to achieve, and they're going to do it for that purpose. But all other persons who have and who have interacted and who would have participated with other persons of different ethnicities, they have a different thinking once their motive is to see a developed Guyana. Thank you.
Tabitha, you raised the question of questioning where we are at the moment, critiquing where we are at the moment. You can't throw the ball to somebody else. All three of you here tonight are leaders. You all are members of parliament, two of you. Darren is an advocate of the law and society. You all are leaders. What, Tabitha, do you see as the greatest challenge to our independence today? And how do you, the leader, plan to engage with others to meet those challenges or that challenge?
Thank you. I think that's an excellent question. As you look at independence and what it meant, I don't think independence was equivalent or equal to nation building. And so there was a gap that existed. We wanted independence, we got independence, but nation building was not first on the agenda after that. And so that, I think, is where there is a gap that needs to be fixed. And so moving forward, and that this is what I think I am very much interested, is talking about nation building, helping persons to understand what building a nation requires. And what Ganesh said is accurate. It has to be education, but things have to go hand in hand because education takes time. What do you do in that interim time? Do we wait until the next generation is educated? So what do we do with the generation that currently exists? Do we just, so it is a constant conversation that has to happen in villages throughout the country, helping them to understand all villages, not just Black villages, but Black villages, Indian villages, indigenous people's villages, so that they understand the concept of building a nation and how that benefits the entire country once we are together, united, trying to move the country together, trying to move the country forward. So I think nation building is what was the gap that existed back then, and that is what we need to focus on moving forward. And I think, if I can say this, a lot of our the young MPs recognize this, and so when you go into the villages, you have this conversation about nation building, about what it means to be Guyanese, what it means. It's not just about you alone, but recognizing that the other community needs you, and you need the other community. And how you balance those things, and recognition that yes, we got political independence. Yes, we were able to say that we're no longer British ruled, but what does it mean to be ruled by our own, and and look at each other as equals in our equals, and can whether another person looks like you and have the same hair texture, that does not mean that they do not want the same things that you want, and have the same desires and expectations for the country, and want to see that the country develop. And so having a discussion about nation building, I think, is necessary, and through education, as Ganesh mentioned, it has to be paramount.
Nation building, Darren Wade, and this is a question for all three of you. Nation building within the context of a fight over oil wealth and an attempt to recolonize Guyana. How do you engage nation building against those challenges? Darren Wade. Darren? Darren, are you with us, Darren?
I hear you the last part. I didn't hear you Dr. Hines.
Both Ganesh and Tabitha, I'm hearing you.
Can you hear me?
My question is that, but I'm repeating the question. Both Ganesh and Tabitha raise the issue of nation building as an urgent requirement for the fulfillment of our independence. And I am posing the question that nation building against the backdrop of a fight over oil wealth and a threat to the independence through recolonization. How do we build a nation against that, those factors in the background or the foreground?
But certainly, Dr. Hines, European powers all over the world, major powers, the US, imperials, an issue of recolonization. We see it in Africa, the fight for Africa, and the wealth in Africa going on between even India, and the various European powers in relation to one's resources. Our mechanism in relation to our oil wealth. How do we? And so we need proper stringent legislation mechanism. Our society need to be strong. Giving out an oil block should not be a phone call away. It should not be like that. We should be able to withstand the pressure. And I think that is some of the issues that may be a threat to us if we look at the last elections, whereby a foreign in and basically removed a elected, not looking the self-interest and of a
We seem to be having some
powers
difficulty.
if they believe which may be beneficial to them. They may try to influence. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
They may want to influence the political system. They may want to influence the political system. So it's important for our leaders to understand and appreciate the threat of the external powers, because the oil could come and it could go on, and then we could be asking ourselves in a few years' time, where is the money gone? Where is the development?
Ganesh Paul.
That's my 2 cents on the issue.
Thank you very much, Darren.
In the issues in relation to the oil wealth and building a nation.
Ganesh Paul, how do we engage the nation building that you raised against the backdrop of recolonization and internal fight over oil wealth? We're not hearing you. You have to turn your mic on.
My apologies. I was saying, Dr. Hines, we have to first understand and appreciate the concept nation building. And we have to also define it as a country, as opposed to persons or sectors of persons defining it and working towards their definition. We are going to have problems once you have sections of people in our society having different definitions for nation building. That is going to create a very, very big problem and lead to and strengthen those threats that you speak of. So collectively as a country, we have to first define what is nation building. And once we can do that as a country, then we will move the second step, and that is to elect our leaders that synchronize with our position as to what nation building is all about. You see, a problem I have with Guyana right now is where you have an organization or a government, and I firmly, Dr. Hines, and nobody can convince me otherwise, believe that this government is not legitimate. And that, sir, is because I spent 33 days counting ballots at the recount, and I know what I found. I know what I saw. I know what is there. So that is my position with them. But I believe, sir, that the People's Progressive Party right now is defining nation building differently from what the APNU AFC would have defined nation building to be. You see, regardless of where your votes come from, when we are lifting a nation, we have to lift it with equity. And we have to look at different communities and different villages differently, but to get them at the same height that we're trying to raise this country to. And that is why I am so comfortable in the coalition. That is why I'm so comfortable in the People's National Congress reform, because their concept, their ideology, their thinking, their objects are focused on bridging that gap between the rich and the poor, and basically lifting the poor to the level where the rich is, and then collectively lifting everyone higher. That is, for me, what will strengthen us as a people and move us towards the direction of enjoying what is nation building. And you speak, sir, about oil wealth and what is happening in that sector. If we as a country can hold one position and we can have that one position strong as our position, then the oil machineries or the oil countries or the countries that have an interest in our oil, they will be forced to do what we say they must do, because we will be having a collective position and not a position that is 50% supported by one side and the other 50% says something differently. But if you all hold to one position, then you are allowing your country to be strong, and we will not be easily broken by the persons who are the forces who want to come into our country and take our resources. I hope I articulated it in a way that you and your viewers can understand. Thank you very much.
Yes, you have. And Tabitha, as we wind down this segment, you have the last say on this subject.
I'm listening to Ganesh, and I couldn't agree more with everything that he said. I think he was right on, spot on nation building and what it means and what is happening in our society. When we look, it's still reflections on our independence journey. We look back to where we started, where we are today. One thing I think that also needs to be recognized is that it has to be a collective action moving forward. It cannot be half of a society or quarter of a society wanting to go in one direction and another quarter in another direction. If it is that this independence journey moves from where it is to where it needs to be. Nation building requires the majority. It requires all of the citizens of the country wanting better for the country, recognizing that we can't get there without each other, and putting our foot to the throttle and saying, well, you know what do we need to do to move from where we are to where we need to be? It can't be just a subsection of the society. So as we celebrate 55 and go on to 56, as young people who are now into the politics and coming forward as leaders, we have to now take on the mantle. We have to now recognize that we now have to decide what our legacy will be in this process, what role we are going to play in this process to push Guyana to where it can be and where it should have been, I would say, right now. Closing points. I would like to urge our young people to get on board. You don't have to get involved in politics necessarily. Politics is one process, one place where you can say you want to be a part of policy making. But there is a major role for civil society because education doesn't happen just from politicians. It happens in the bottom houses. It happens with NGOs and community organizations, recognizing that there is need for an educated society in civil and civic education, and deciding to do that in your own communities, in your own churches, in the mandates, recognizing that there's something better and someplace better we should be as a society, and wanting it and deciding to work together to get there as a country, because we can't do it on our own.
Tabitha Sarabo, Member of Parliament, the voices of the young people raising the question that we must continue to question our independence, because in questioning our independence, we will detect the errors of the past and seek to correct them. The young people raising their own questions and putting on the table their own solutions. We got from them that they think that nation building is one of the most urgent undertakings of our independence at this project. I want to thank you all. Thank you, Tabitha. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Ganesh. I wish we could have more time, but we've got another panel coming up. You all are the great grandchildren. Maybe they are the grandchildren, and we hear what they have to say. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for having us. Good night.
Yes. And then we have it, the young people, the young salt of the earth. It's their Guyana too. It's their Guyana too. and perhaps it's their Guyana more than ours. You know, people like myself were once there, and we made our strides, but we made our mistakes. And the young people have to study and critique what we did as they carry on the tradition, the radical tradition of saying that independence is not a moment. It's a project that has to be renewed and renewed so that we can walk one step, two steps, three steps beyond where our parents walked. My next panel is made up of Adriana Thomas, a young lady who has thrown her hat in the ring and says that she's running for president. Come what may at the next election. Welcome, Adriana. And then another lady who didn't say that she will throw her hat in the ring, but a lot of Guyanese saying that she must throw her hat in the ring. And then a young man who I know very well, I watch him grow up politically, Amansa Desir, Kibaki Amsterdam, Adriana Thomas, welcome to Politics 101. I'm in a little bouncy mood today because I get to talk to cross generations in one evening. Amansa, what does independence mean to you? What you came of age at a particular point on this journey. What does it mean to you?
Independence, in terms of the context of independence, means to me in general self-determination, the right to determine your own destiny. Particularly for me, this 55th independence was a time of very deep reflection for me. Because one, as you mentioned, I'm now in the political arena and regarded as a political leader. And therefore, with that comes a burden of responsibility. And so for me, at this place, in this time, it was a time of very deep reflection on what it means to be independent. Because I do believe that what independence meant in 1966 is not what it means today. The colonial masters have taken on a different guise. And so it is important that we be able to continuously assess independence in the context of where we are in the moment and in the time, because that is what it really means to be independent. Where I am at the time that I am there. How do I assess independence? What are the factors that I take into account? And so for me, that is where I spent really and truly all of yesterday thinking about it and thinking about the burden that we have to take this nation forward into true independence. So for me, that is what that meant for me and what it still means for me.
And I will throw the same question to you. Thanks very much, Amansa. I'll throw the same question to you, Adriana, as somebody who has been very trenchant in your criticism and critiques of modern Guyana, contemporary Guyana. How and what does independence mean for you, coming from the trajectory that you are coming from?
Dr. Hines, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me to this program. Hello, Amansa. Hello, Kibaki. Dr. Hines, I don't know how many people know, but I was in the Young Brigade and National Cadet Corps. I joined the National Cadet Corps at about 14, and I spent, I left when I was either 18 or 19. what my exposure and experience, I see people are writing a lot of negative things about the Guyana National Service, but I'd like to take this opportunity to speak to some of the positives. People say to me, Adriana, how is it that you're so patriotic? And I say to them, blame it on the Guyana National Service. Because as a 14-year-old girl, I was in uniform with my yachting boots, and every time we had vacation, Easter vacation, August vacation, we would go to one of the National Service locations. It was Tumachamari, or we went to Conawarook. I remember walking 9 miles with a National Service uniform at the age of maybe 14, 15 or 16 maybe, and with 9 miles from Tumachamari to Conawarook in the jungle. And I remember being at Conawarook, and 1 year at that time, Major General Joe Singh, he was the head of the Guyana National Service. And he came for us. We were maybe 15 years old. I was probably 15 years old. And he took us to see the Kaieteur Falls. I remember the helicopter coming, and we got onto the helicopter and we went to the Kaieteur Falls. I remember going to Itabu, I think, and Tipiru. So when people ask me, Adriana, how come you are so patriotic? I said to them, can you imagine a young 14, 15, 16-year-old girl being exposed to her country and being trained to serve this country and not for the country to serve me? So I say to people, I didn't just happen. I didn't just happen. There was something that made me. And that thing that made me, and so I particularly want to speak to this, because when I hear or see a lot of the negative things about the National Service, I would like to say that I am a big positive of the National Service and a positive result from the Guyana National Service. So that's one of the points I'd like to make. And quickly about independence. At 55, you're moving into retirement. People say at 55, we're still a young nation. I guess in the context of when you look at the United States as a 200-plus-year-old democracy, and in that context, I think people say that we're still a young democracy. But yet, at 55, you're supposed to show some degree of maturity. So independence, when I look at countries like Singapore, for example, Singapore got independence, I think, in 1965, and sometime around that, which is at the same time like Guyana. And Singapore has moved from third to first, When I look at, and this is how I am evaluating our 55 years of independence. When I look at Rwanda had a genocide in 1994, where over 800,000 people died in the genocide in Rwanda. And less than a generation later, about 16 years later, Rwanda's economy was the fastest growing African country with a 7.5 annual growth for 10 years straight prior to the COVID-19 pandemic last year. I am looking, Dr. Hines, at Guyana's independence at 55 in that context. So when people say that, oh, Rwanda is a homogeneous society and Singapore is a homogeneous society, when people say that once blood has been shed, you can't recover from that, that's why I mentioned Rwanda. 800,000 people died in a genocide. And yet Rwanda was able to they picked themselves up and they moved the country forward as the fastest growing African country. Singapore got their independence from Malaysia 1 year before Guyana. And Singapore on two pillars, trade and knowledge, not gold, not bauxite, not forestry, not oil, not all of the other resources that we have. Singapore on knowledge and trade became one of the the country from third to first. I'm speaking, Dr. Hines, to possibilities. And I close here. I've decided that I would like to run for president of Guyana. And the reason I decided that was because Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. But I realized that I should really be the leader I want to see. Because essentially, except you have a different thinking, because what we have, this is the worldview of our current leaders. The reason we're having this discussion is because their worldview is different to ours. The reason we're talking about this Guyana and this one, we know where we want to go. We would like to have one people, one nation, one destiny. But yet we'd like to go to the moon, but we continue to board an aircraft, or we continue to board a train. The mechanism that we're using to get to the moon, we're boarding an aircraft. You can only fly to another country in an aircraft. You can't go to the moon. And if we board a train, we continue to board a train, we will only get from one station to the next. So we need a different level of thinking at the level of leadership that has the authority to say that we want to have one people, one nation, one destiny. Then let's develop the mechanism to achieve that. And I'll pause here and I'll come back with some other points.
Thank you very much. Kraki, you come out of a tradition that has always questioned our independence, the tradition of the Black Power movement and the left-wing movement of Walter Rodney and others, which have constantly questioned Caribbean independence. What does this 55 years of independence mean to you? Your volume is not on. You're on now.
Good evening, viewers. Good evening, Dr. Hines and my fellow panelists. What does this 55 years mean for me? 55 years of independence. I said just not so long ago that Guyana as a 55-year-old country reminds you of some 55-year-old adults who, quote unquote, have achieved so little in life that the general populace says it's best your parents they plant coconut trees. They would have reaped more. I say that because when you look at the possibilities of Guyana, Guyana is per capita, in my mind, the richest Caribbean country. We have vast resources of all types. And when you compare Guyana to other Caribbean countries which have very small amounts of resources, in fact, many of them have singular resources, and the strides they have made compared to us, it leaves a lot to be desired. And so 55 years of independence to me in Guyana as a nation says to me that we have failed to capitalize on the opportunity for self-determination. We have failed to work together as a people like we did for independence to move this nation forward. I am a 70s child. It means that I was born shortly after the 1966 year. And what I saw at that time, growing up, if we had continued on that trajectory, I dare say that Guyana would have been comparable to any Singapore, any Malaya, any Brazil. Because the fact is, what I saw as a youngster growing up was a Guyana that was really involved in self-determination. I saw a nation that was striving to feed, clothe, and house itself according to the leader's guide or insistence. I saw a nation where education was paramount. As a matter of fact, we were the leaders in education in the Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean for sure. And when you look at where we are 55 years later, it certainly leaves a lot to be desired. And so independence 55 years after looking at it for me is failure staring you starkly in the face. That's what Guyana at 55 means to me right now.
Answer this here. I concur with Mr. Amsterdam on the first decade after independence. The education project, the housing, the drive for self-determination in Guyana, in Jamaica, in Trinidad, in Barbados, in St. Lucia, and all those places. But we lost our way. We lost our way. We were once the leaders fighting for a new world economic order, a new world information order, a new world political order. The voices of a Michael Manley and Forbes Burnham resonated across the globe. We led when it came to standing up for Africa, South Africa, and Namibia, and Zimbabwe. Where did we go wrong from your perspective?
I think we went wrong when we allowed greed and selfishness to become the hallmark of our politics. We allowed greed and selfishness to become the hallmark of our politics. And I think that took us off track. I think the fire that our foreparents had for independence translated into them seeing beyond themselves. And I think we have lost that ability to see beyond ourselves. I think we have to begin as Guyanese to understand that we are interconnected and we are far more connected than we believe. You mentioned the support that was brought to South Africa and other countries who were in the apartheid struggle, etc., by our former and founder leaders. And that is because they understood that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That is because they understood that we are more connected than we believe, and we are more connected than we understand. And I think that is what we have lost. I would go as far as to say that we are in danger of losing our humanity. And I'm not talking now about politics, but I'm bringing it home to the individual. Because to the extent that as an individual, I am not independent, to the extent that as an individual, I do not have independence of thought, independent of action in the context of what is right and what is lawful, then by extension, am I really independent? Is my nation really independent? And so for me, like I started off by saying, we are at a crossroads and we have to do the reflection, we have to do the introspection that is necessary for us to lift ourselves up out of this rut that we have undeniably found ourselves in. And it is going to take our people to do that. I'm sorry to say, but the politicians and the politics is only a part of the answer. But the answer and the power lies with the people. We as political leadership have a duty, as Adriana so rightly put it, to set an example. But at all times, the power has always been with the people. And so, yes, we have lost that fire of interconnectedness. We do not understand that to the extent that one of us is insecure, all of us are insecure. And so when we begin to, at a personal level, work that out, I believe that we will see that working out in our nation. That love of nationhood that Adriana spoke about as well is something that we have lost. That pride of place. I often ask, what does it mean to be Guyanese? What is this Guyanese-ness? Are we able to define that? What does that mean for us as a people? Where is the pride in that Guyanese-ness? Because when you lose that sense of pride and nationhood and patriotism, you are then subject to the whims and fancies of those who would now become the new colonial masters under the guise of neo-colonialism, as we call it. And so we have to be aware, Dr. Hines, we have to be aware, and we have to be educated, let me add. And so I think our greatest investment now has to be, not in the sugar, the dime, and the bauxites, we've heard that. Our greatest investment has to be in human resources, in our people, to develop.
Our greatest investment must be in our people. The colonials never left us alone. We nationalized our bauxite, but we realized we had to sell it to them. And they determined the prices. And they used that as leverage over us. In the context of the Cold War, they forced us to take a side, and when we didn't take a side, they punished us. The colonials have always been at the door. Adriana, the colonials have come back to the door, in my estimation, which makes the challenge of, first of all, maintaining our independence and then expanding that independence a real big challenge. Speak to that, Adriana. No audio. We're not hearing you. You have to turn on your sound.
Dr. Hines, I'd like to push back against that statement a bit.
Okay.
And I would like to say, I once read a statement that says, people like standards. Don't be afraid to set them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as I look at our current and previous or not so long ago leaders, I am tempted to say to them, people like standards. Don't be afraid to set some. And I think, Dr. Hines, that as a country, we have not set a standard by which we would like people to operate or to treat us by. A friend once said to me, Adriana, you have to teach people how to treat you. And as I look at our current leaders and our not so long ago leaders, I'm not so sure, Dr. Hines, that even if the opportunity had presented itself in terms of where the previous colonial masters, as we would call them, that wanted to give us an opportunity for us to evolve according to Bob Marley, by emancipating ourselves from mental slavery. I am not so sure that our leaders were ready for that. So I think that we have to talk about that mental preparedness. And I think that's what Amanzo was talking about. So I'd like to push back against the colonial or the new neocolonialism, as we would call it, right? And to say that I still believe that there's scope and space for us to set some standards as to how we would like to operate and how we would like to treat and to be treated and how we would like to engage. I'm not saying that we'll be allowed to do that totally, but I still think that there is scope for that. And I'd like to make the point when Amanzo talked about as a people we need to be educated. I'd like to say all things are created twice. First of all, it's created in the mental, well, you have a mental picture of what an independent Guyana should mean, of what a one Guyana should mean, of what a one people, one nation, one destiny should mean. And then that mental picture is transformed into a physical picture. When we were supporting South Africa and Zimbabwe and those countries, in order for them to achieve their independence, there was a clear mental picture of what was needed. And then that was translated into a physical picture, which was independence. I think somewhere along the line, Dr. Hines, what we have lost is that mental picture of what it means to be independent and what it means to move towards one people, one nation, one destiny. And I'd like to say something that it might be a bit controversial, but I'll still say it nevertheless. I think Burnham, the Forbes Burnham, came the closest to having a concept or a clear concept of what it means to develop a pathway towards achieving one people, one nation, and one destiny. And I'll tell you why I'm saying that. I did research for the Ministry of Culture, Youth, and Sports a few years ago to develop a civic education manual. And as I was doing the research for that manual, I discovered that there are two times when a nation will have is required to have a civic education program. One, when a nation is recovering from a civil war, you need to mobilize people again around the country. And two, when a country has become an independent country. Burnham understood that. And so Burnham had developed a civic education program to mobilize the citizenry around the new Guyana, around the new dear land of Guyana, and so now I have added a third reason why there is need for a civic education program, and that is in the context of globalization. Because while we're one global village, as we would say, I still think that we need to develop a civic education program so that countries will maintain their own individuality. So if countries as individuals are strong, then they bring to the whole global village strong individual countries. So to answer your specific question in terms of, to respond to the question that you asked, I think that we have to, one, get a mental picture again as to what does it mean to be one people, one nation, and one destiny. What I see is a lot of trying to get the physical right. But except we get that mental picture right, we're not going to get the physical right. And I'll close on this point here to say that nothing just happens. Nothing just happens. You have to make things happen. And so while Amanza, yes, I would say that the leadership also points the nation in certain direction. And so leadership is important because the leadership also points the nation and the people in a nation to a certain direction. And that's part of the challenge in terms of the direction that the nation is being pointed in.
Thank you very much. And Kudaki, how do we preserve and expand our independence at this juncture when the external forces show their hands in an overt way and have mobilized global forces? Notwithstanding what Gianna just said, the reality is that even with your mental sense of where you are, when the bulldozer comes, as we saw in right, you're not, but she's right, that you have to find ways of challenging and push back. And I think she makes the point of Burnham, and you could talk about Eric Williams and Errol Barrow and Michael Manley. I have to bring in the Caribbean stuff because that generation had the mental picture. They believed in something called Guyana and the Caribbean. That is why they tried with the Federation. They tried with CARIFTA. They tried with CARICOM. They did not just believe in Guyana as Guyana. They believed in Guyana as part because they were thinking of enemies of the world. Kiraki, I'm saying, how do we navigate these murky waters? Because they're murky. Song.
Operator sound.
You're getting song now.
Yes, let me start by repeating what I want to consider popular saying, that the last patriot died in 1985. And Adriana referenced Forbes Burnham and his approaches to nation building and dealing with the question of independence and so on. What we need, if we're talking about pushing back and expanding on the independence that we currently have, whatever little of it we have, we have to start being patriots. That's where it starts. The colonialists, the neo-colonials are at the door now, because many of those who offer themselves up for leadership, many of those who occupy positions of leadership in this society are no longer patriots. They are selfish people. And in their own quest for self-aggrandizement, they have placed the nation and its independence at risk. So if we're talking about consolidating on that independence and expanding it, I am saying that the need now is for patriotism. And that patriotism cannot be achieved if it is that one set of people believe that they have the right to dominate another. That patriotism can only be achieved when the real symbol of nationhood is achieved. That is one people, one nation, one destiny. When we recognize that we are stronger together, when we recognize that as a nation, we each and every one of us have responsibilities for not only developing ourselves and communities and families, but for securing the nation, securing our independence, securing our resources, formulating policies which will defend the resources, which will defend our nationhood, which will ensure that the neo-colonials don't have such an easy time interfering in the well-being of this nation. And that is what we don't have. We are at this juncture right now. We've just completed the 2020 elections. I think we are singular in our belief that the results of the elections were influenced by the neo-colonials. The question is, who brought them? Who opened the doors? Who let them in? And when we can deal with the fact that it is our own citizens who let them in, then is when we can address the issues which divide us and allow them to come in. The old African saying, when brothers fight, strangers inherit. And that is what we have in this society right now. That is why our independence is, quite frankly, teetering on the brink of collapse, if it has not already collapsed.
Compromised independence, and talking about someone at the door. Nigel Hughes is at the door, waiting to get in. I'm going to pose this last question to you all. Quick answer, starting with you, Manzo. We talk a lot about ethnic unity. That is a big challenge. One of the biggest challenges we have had is ideological unity. And I would argue, you all don't have to respond to it. I will argue that one of the problems we had in the last government was our inability to manage ideological differences. We are not a monolithic people. Not all Black people come to their viewpoint of the world from one straight thing. Not all Indian people, not all Amerindian people. This nation building that we're talking about, this unity, one people, one nation, one destiny, has to be more than just bringing races together. That is paramount. But we also have to bring the different shades of thought together. Amanza Desir.
You wish for me to comment on what you just said?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I absolutely concur. And the question has to be, what is the mission? And the mission has to be to set out very clearly for all of us what the Guyana mission is about. One people, one nation with one destiny. And then the next challenge has to be, how do I, in my uniqueness, contribute to that mission, contribute to that ideal, understanding that my uniqueness is no greater than the other person's. And so we have to be about what that mission is, what that Guyanese-ness is about. Because I think up until now, 55 years later, we are unable to say definitively what it means to be Guyanese. We have platitudes, we have the motto, one people, one nation, one destiny, that is the North Star that we are aspiring to. But what does it mean to be Guyanese? We have been unable to crystallize that into a vision that we can all embrace, and we can all bring what makes us unique to strengthen. Guyana's strength is in her diversity. But for too long, we have fallen victim to the need to be dominant, and that my ideology must supersede yours, not understanding that we are better together, we are stronger together, and it is possible to build a Guyana where I do not need to sacrifice the flavor of what I bring or who I bring to the table in order for it to grow and for it to thrive. And so I think that is the most immediate challenge that we have. We can have the best policies, we can have the best political and infrastructure, but unless as a people we begin to rise up and we begin to take on the concept of nationhood and what it means to be Guyanese seriously, unless that becomes our North Star, not preserving or not preserving to the detriment of the whole, my individual ideology, but making accommodation for how can we unite, understanding that that which unites us is greater than that which may divide us. I think that is our immediate challenge. And I think it will take this generation to move Guyana forward into that day where that sense of nationhood can be accomplished. The seeds are planted. The seeds are planted in people like Kadaki, in Audriana, and those national songs that we sing, and those the national anthem, that we begin to feel and breathe and to take pride in that. I think that is what will break us out of this dilemma that we are in and set the foundation for proper nation building. When we are able to place history in its right context, when the mention of certain names of our founder leaders, etc., do not appear to be bogeymen anymore, but we are rightly able to see, rightly able to divide, rightly able to understand their context, their contributions, without stripping them of their humanity. I think these are the prerequisites for us to move forward, Dr. Hines.
Thank you very much, Adriana. Diversity in unity. Your song is off.
I said a man, and even as you were talking, I was singing, I want to build this land that belongs to me. Plant on this land to build our economy, to leave for our children a future that will be free. I grew up in the days when we were singing national songs. I grew up in the days when I looked at the independence celebrations the other night from the almost the beginning to the end. I grew up in that era. And you can't build a nation except people feel connected to that nation. And I think what we've lost is that connection. I remember as a child in national service, I read the prayer, I think, at one of those flag raising ceremonies. I was looking at the flag raising ceremony and I was thinking that our leaders cannot even agree on where to have independence celebration every year. Just agree on the small things. That's a small thing. Agree that at the Parliament building, we will have the independence celebration. So the psyche of the people at least will see our leaders, the PNC and the PPP, if I can put it this way, agreeing on the small things. Don't let's get to electoral reform yet, and let's get to constitutional reform. Just agree on every year independence, we will have the flag raising ceremony at one common neutral place. But as I looked at it, the APNU and the AFC held independence celebrations one place, and the current government held independence celebration one place. I don't think our leaders understand what that does to the psyche of the people when you're talking about one people, one nation, one destiny. And I'd like to also say, Dr. Hines, to mention 2 points. One is on the Rwanda point in terms of what Rwanda and Singapore developed. For profound change to happen, you need three things. You need the capacity for change, the ability for change, and the will to change. What Rwanda and Singapore developed was the capacity for change, the ability for change, and the will to change. What we need to develop is those three things. The other point I'd like to say is in terms of, someone said to me, Adriana, if you have an opportunity to bring Guyana together, how would you do that? I said, I will see us as 750,000 added value. So the person said to me, so you would use economics? I said, yes, I would use economics as the entry point. For example, if I was the private sector president of the private sector commission, of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, and the chairman of the private sector commission, when the government was laying off all of those public servants, particularly, I would have met with the government and said that these are my customers. These are my customers. These are the middle class. Primarily, most of these people make up the middle class. Their children come to my malls. Their children go to our stores. They shop so these are our customers. So by laying them off, what you're doing, you're reducing the purchasing power in the society. So it's not about APNU and AFC supporters and PPP-C supporters and Afro-Guyanese and Indo-Guyanese. These are my customers. And what you're doing, you're reducing the purchasing power of our customers. So I think that we can use economics as an entry point. We are 750,000 added value. And with 750,000 people, we do not even have enough people to get to where we would like to go. If we had more people in Guyana, the cost to cross the Bermuda Bridge would have been lower. And so we have to start seeing ourselves as an added value, 750,000 added value in terms of, and we use the economics slant as an entry point to get to where we'd like to go in the context of one people, one nation, one destiny. So that's my contribution on that, Dr. Hines.
Thank you very much, Adriana. Kadaki, you have the last word. Diversity and unity, the way forward. Sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Diversity and unity, the way forward. Quite frankly, the way forward is in the statement itself, diversity and unity. We are diverse, but we must unite. We have our different likings, we have our different cultures, but we have to come together as a people. And we have to recognize that my differences do not make me lesser a human being, lesser a Guyanese than your differences. And that's what we have to recognize. And when we come to recognize that despite we are different, we are equal, we most likely would be able to build the kind of Guyana that we would want to build. Because then recognition of everybody's differences, but equality and strengths, is what will allow us to feel that we are contributing equally to the growth and development of the society. It is that which will allow us to believe and would want to put our shoulders to the wheel, knowing that we are recognized as different, diverse, but we are a part of the whole, and we will be treated equally as part of the whole. And until such time that our leaders, politicians, and otherwise recognize that, look, every Guyanese has an important role to play in nation building. Every Guyanese should have equal access to the resources of this country. Every Guyanese should be treated fairly and equally. We are going to continue to remain diverse and not unified. And if we want to deal with nation building, we have to recognize that that's not what we want. What we want, unity in the diversity.
There we go. Thank you very much, and thanks, Manza. Thanks, Audriana. You all have always answered the call. I'm grateful because without the contributors, there is no show. Without the viewers, there is no show. You can have a host, but without panelists and viewers, you don't have a show. Thank you all very much. I think you all have lifted, as all the panelists from the first and the second panel, you have lifted this conversation about independence. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hines.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Thank you. And as we move along towards the last segment, we have Brother Nigel Hughes, who we have kept waiting, but I am sure he will agree with me that some of the discourses by the younger ones tonight is worth the wait, Nigel. We're not. We're getting sound, but it's not proper sound. Operator, can you help Nigel there? We seem to be having some technical difficulties as we try to sort that out. Just to reflect on our program tonight, I think we've had some really rich interventions from all of the panelists. We know that the elders are seasoned in these discussions, but I was quite impressed with the intervention from the younger people, the young panel of Ganesh Maipal and Tabitha Sarabo and Darren Wade, and the panel just now of Audriana Thomas and Amanza Walton Desir and Kedaki Amsterdam. And what I particularly like was their willingness to engage in self-criticism, that they did not come here to tell you that all is well in the camp, that we have done so wonderfully well. They acknowledge that. But they've raised new questions about our independence, the question of nation building, the question of a vision of where we want to take our country. Who is a Guyanese and what makes up a Guyanese?
Can I do? Can you hear me now?
You're with me now. Nigel is here. Nigel, I was saying sorry for keeping you waiting, but I'm sure that you'll agree with me that the level of discourse tonight really was worth the wait.
Doc, I was saying to you when I was garbled that I would have happily have ceded all my time. That was a very, very rich discussion, and I am encouraged by the fact that the people who participated in that are all young people who seem to have a very good grasp of our political reality, and of course have formed views which are quite forthright going forward. So I thought it was very rich debate, and I would have happily, if I could have signaled to you, said to you, look, go ahead and have them finish.
Yes, thank you. Nigel, thanks for coming on for the first time to Politics 101. I'm going to take you back in time, I'm sure, because I have a sense of your age. I think we're the same age, that you were a little primary school boy in 1966.
Yeah, I was born actually in 64. Yeah, and 66.
Oh gosh, well, you weren't even a primary school. You were a toddler.
I was a toddler.
yes. But you would have grown up in the 70s.
Yeah, absolutely. 70s, 80s.
Yes,
yeah, absolutely.
Right. Which was still the independence decade. You know, we entered independence, and there was the Black Power movement. Mm-hmm. There was the left-wing radical movement. All coming together. There was the back and forth, the concourse of ideas. And I think people of your generation and my generation really grew up in that concourse of ideas. And it helped to, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you know, Guyana had a very, very rich period of intellectuals, of professionals coming from the 50s. If you think of the Martin Carters of the world, who nobody seems to remember now, the Metal Halsers, the coming all the way through, we have always been at the forefront, the cutting edge of intellectual movements. The starting of the university at Queen's College, the fact that our people always traveled, always excelled, that we always believed that there was a premium for being the best and being the best intellectually. We always put a premium on that. And we were always ahead, I think, of the Caribbean in that. And that comes all the way through. I mean, the 60s, the 70s. I was a very active school student when Rodney came. I remember running down the road behind him. Dude Not Sing, Small that came from Jamaica to do the treason trial with Arnold. So we've always had a ferment of a very rich intellectual debates, which sadly I think we've lost. Because if you ask, let's just look at the arts, which is not as controversial as other parts of our life. The arts, it's somehow, and I said this with great deference to the artists who are around now, don't seem to have the same radical edge, always pushing the envelope to get at a new interpretation. So it's a different era, and of course people will say, well, there's a lot more choice, there are a lot more distractions, but the 60s and 70s, the other unique thing about Guyana is that Guyana had two left-wing parties. I don't think anywhere else in the Caribbean we had that. Trinidad, you had a left and a right. Jamaica, you had a left and a right. Barbados, you had a left and a right. And wherever else you went, you had a left and a right. And the right was very right, and the left was sometimes not as left as it could have been. But in Guyana, both sides of the political political divide were left, or at least pretended to be left, which means that you had a lot of progressive thought that came into the society, and the level of debate and discussion, I think perhaps, and I say this with deference to my Caribbean brothers and sisters, was a lot higher. The problem is that we never managed the race problem and put it in its context and realized how much of a threat that was to both the ideological approach, the class approach, because race trumped both ideology and class. And unfortunately has put us where we are today. And my fear is that unless we bring the intellectual resources to bear about how we are going to design the future, we're going to run into, well, we're in problems. We're probably going to be in worse problems. But I don't want to be too pessimistic, but it is where we are. And it's not the happiest of places. I think all the four panelists that you had before, three panelists, sorry, confirmed that this is not a happy place. I'm sorry I missed the earlier panelists, but I suspect that the general consensus in Guyana across the board is that we are not in a happy place. And the tragedy is that we're not dedicating our energies to get better other than by way of platitudes.
Yes, and I'm so glad you raised the question of the intellectual tradition, medical tradition. I mean, when you have the quality of leaders of a Burnham, a Jagan, a Quayana, a Martin Carter, in one generation, you have the quality of those, and I'm sure I'm missing others. There's a you mentioned metals, Edgar Metals, really phenomenal a writer.
You could go to Wilson Harris.
Yes.
The tradition in the literary side is
yes, all in one generation, and then you come down to the next generation of the Rodneys and Rupert
right. Elsa Gavaya. We had Elsa Gavaya. We've got a very rich tradition intellectually.
Yes.
The real question, though, is, David, and I was having this discussion with my wife the other day, is for all the brilliance that we have had, have we really delivered as a people? We've had the resources. We have gone down several routes, but the reality is our generation collectively, and I talk about you, me, everybody, when you look at the state of Guyana, I think we have not made it necessarily a better place. And there may be millions of reasons why that has happened, but it is what it is. And we perhaps have to start by the admission that we, for all our various positions, for all our views, our contributions, it hasn't worked. And therefore, we need to look outside the box in terms of how we begin to address this and move it forward.
Yes, thank you. Let me get a little bit personal here. I have never seen you as a bleeding heart politician. Yet you threw your hat in the party politics ring at a certain point. There must have been something that drove you there. And then you pulled out. There must have been something pushed you out very quickly. Talk a little bit about that. It's a question that has always been on my mind.
Oh dear. I was hoping this day would never come. Actually, let me say this. I grew up in a tradition, and actually, when I grew up, when Rodney was around, he used to come around to the house, and I and that whole crew, when they were fighting the Burnham regime, were very, very close to my mother, and I was exposed to Jocelyn Dow, that whole movement, and we were in school at the time when they had moved around the headmasters, and one of our headmasters got moved, etc., etc. So the whole protest against that, and of course, because you come from a privileged position, I went to school in which a lot of the assumptions, I was at Saints, you took for granted. You took, privileged position, and I heard in your previous panel them saying that this whole movement and there was nationhood. That nationhood that we talk about was in a certain sector of the community. It wasn't necessarily across the board. So in Saints, we had a lot of resistance to national service. We didn't see its purpose. Today, I probably articulate a totally different view. I never went to national service, but we resisted it because you associated it with a lot of the propaganda. So there are a lot of things that happened. But to come to the crux of your question, when I came back, I never thought, came back from studying in the UK, I never thought that I would actually get into active politics. I'd always be there, I'd help in the background, support some causes. But when around 2010, and there was this one particular moment, I never forget it, when I was in the midst of cross-examining Dr. Luncheon, and he said that, in this case, he said, in response to the question that the African people were not qualified to represent the country. It didn't matter to me which people were qualified to represent the country, but I thought anytime this country reaches the stage where a person can get up and say on the oath that any group, not whether the African group or the indigenous group or the Indian group, that any group was not qualified to lead, to represent the country, we're in a dangerous state, very, very dangerous state. And I remember going home that day after hearing that, because I never lived in any other country. I only lived in Ghana, I only left to study. And I thought, you know, if I'm going to be here as a citizen, continue to live as a citizen, and the philosophy of the day says that, look, you can actually say, especially when you're as senior as he is, that there is a group that is not qualified. We are in a dangerous state. And I happen to be African, but that was not the point. If he had said an indigenous person wasn't qualified, if an African person had said an Indian person isn't qualified, I would have a problem. And I did believe, I remember I used to scoff at my wife when she got into politics in 2005 with the AFC. And I thought, you know, if you don't get up and take a stand now against this whole philosophy that people can be excluded on the basis that somebody else thinks they're not qualified, then do not complain down the line when things really get out of hand and you're not in a position. And it was purely by chance. I happened to be in Linden in September 2011 when the AFC invited me to mount the platform. I didn't know I was going to do that. Got on board, got up there and spoke about it. And I spoke specifically to it because if you know the history of all the peoples in this country, and I'm not trying to elevate any struggle more than the other, but if you know the extent of the struggles that and the blood that is in the ground, and in some cases paid in full in advance to be a citizen of this country, then once you reach the stage that somebody believes that you are not qualified, when your foreparents are paid in full, then that's the time when you have to get up and say, I'm terribly sorry, this is not going to go on. I didn't stay very long in politics. By the time 2016 came, I'd left. But if there was a moment that made it, that was it. That was the moment. And before that, my approach has always been, look, I've been blessed. I have a talent, perhaps, in the legal system, and therefore I must always give that to the people who can't afford it. So I give my time to those that cannot afford the service. Because if I get that blessing and I don't use it for the people that can benefit from it, I'm not really doing very much.
I'm talking about the legal system, Nigel. It obviously was one of the most important planks of our independence, because we were talking about a movement from colonialism to independence, and the law became very important in legal architecture, if I may say so. And in our society, you had different aspects of the law. You had human rights, the question of international law, the question of whether you remain in the Privy Council or you have your own indigenous courts.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yes. Walk us through, if you will, and because what I want our listeners to get out of this, has our judicial system kept up to pace with the ultimate freedom and liberation that were in our minds at the time of independence?
I'm happy that you mentioned the Privy Council, because what happens is Guyana, between, I would say, independence, 66, and to the mid-70s, probably even up to the 80s, had the best judiciary in the Caribbean. It started off that way. When Guyana became a republic, and this is very important, a lot of people resisted this because before we had the Governor General, and the Governor General was the Queen's representative, and we thought, oh my God, how could we possibly become a republic? Where is Burnham taking us? And if you fast forward to now, Barbados, which is perhaps the most conservative of our Caribbean colleagues, is talking about becoming a republic. Burnham made Guyana a republic since 1970. And in keeping with the concept of the independence of your mind and thinking, where you don't have to follow this traditional colonial common law and approach to law, but your jurists must have their own independent approach to the law, its purpose and its function, because you know, David, law can be equally oppressive as it can be liberating. And so when Burnham said we are going to get rid of the Privy Council, yes, a lot of people said that that was because, of course, he wanted to control the judiciary. But some of the judges who sat in that judiciary have been hailed for every decade afterwards as some of the most brilliant. And several of them ruled against Burnham on several occasions. Now, we had a very dark period where the party flag did fly over the Court of Appeal. But the concept about moving from the Privy Council was that we must find our own independent Caribbean jurisprudence to lead us going forward in the interpretation of our circumstances. And one of the classic cases is the death penalty. People in the Caribbean, by and large, support the death penalty. I don't, but a lot of people do. And they always feel it was an imposition from the Privy Council when they came saying that, look, you shouldn't be hanging people, etc., etc. And that's just an example of how we wanted to have our own homegrown jurisprudence. We ended up with the Caribbean, the CCJ. A lot of people wanted the CCJ because it provided another tier outside of Guyana. But for me, the real essence of the CCJ was that we are beginning to create a Caribbean jurisprudence. We had fine educational institutions, University of the West Indies, produced some of the best people. And to have our best jurists sit and identify a pathway to a Caribbean jurisprudence was excellent. Unfortunately, I heard utterings the other day that people are saying that we don't want the CCJ, but that's another discussion. I hope we don't ever get there. So we became a Republican, we got rid of the Privy Council, and we struggled through, and we struggled through, and we struggled through. And the irony of Guyana today, we talk about the Burnham Constitution from 1980, etc., is that we have on paper one of the most advanced constitutions in some regards, and I give you an example. A lot of the international treaties that Guyana has entered into, which confer direct rights onto the citizens or the beneficiaries of those treaties and the rights, civil and political rights. Normally, in other countries, you have to pass domestic legislation to give power to the rights and privileges that come out of that treaty. In Guyana, there are certain treaties that are directly incorporated into our law, which is very advanced. It doesn't happen anywhere else. Problem is, we set up the methodology for enforcing it. For example, the Human Rights Commission, and then we play politics. So we don't people the Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission has never been established. So all those rights, whether it's political, economic rights, indigenous rights, women's rights, child rights, all those rights that are established under the treaties that we have ratified, which our Constitution says are directly enforceable, we can't enforce because we haven't yet set up the Human Rights Commission. So we have a lot of progressive utterances in the Constitution, but they're not enforceable for one or the other. Article 13 is a classic. Lincoln Lewis goes on a lot about it. It's not justiciable. Or Article 40, which says that we must always follow the contemporary human rights, etc., etc. It's a question of interpreting it and how we're going forward. So we have a progressive instrument. There were a lot of recommendations that were made coming out of the Constitutional Talks between 97 Commission, and 2000. We've implemented some of them. There are a lot of other recommendations that are there that have never been implemented. When the last government came into force, we had a little select committee that was appointed. We reviewed, we made recommendations as to what should happen. That, of course, didn't find favor. And so we are again where we are today, having the same discussion that we were having pre-independence and post-independence, which essentially comes down to race. And our problem is if we don't find a way quickly in terms of the constitutional architecture to deal with this, those that have a lot more money to spend in research on how to deal with countries like ours, because there's nothing unique about Ghana in that sense, will outmaneuver us, outposition us, and by the time we realize what is happening, it is going to be too late. If you permit me, there's one point when I was listening to your previous panel, where they said, you know, or I think you might have said, you know, the colonialists didn't allow. The world, nobody allows you space. Absolutely nobody gives you an inch. So one of the things that I think Mr. Marley was talking about when he was saying emancipate yourself is saying, look, understand that you have to fight and preserve at every stage. Nobody's going to give you the space to be independent. You have to say, I am sorry, this is where I'm going, this is what I intend. And I know that people who have more resources, economic or otherwise, are going to try to influence the people around me. And we need a generation of people who are smart enough coming out of our schools, who understand what's going on, and not say, "Oh my God, we didn't get it. We've been defeated, etc." That are smart enough to be able to maneuver. So at the end of the day, the real beneficiaries of this project called Guyana actually get the maximum possible benefit, knowing fully well that nobody's going to do us a favor. And don't expect a favor, don't cry for it, because it has never happened in any other civilization.
Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. And you're a Marley student and fan, and he says, we are what we are, and that's the way it's going to be. You can't educate us for no equal opportunity, talking about my freedom. And I think you captured it there as a good student of Bob Marley. Let me try to get in two questions here. Given what has happened around the election, and given the fact that for the first time in our post-colonial history, judicial review was utilized, bringing the courts into the spotlight. Are you worried? And you alluded to it when you said that some people are saying that we don't need a CCJ. Are you worried that we may lose some popular confidence in the judicial branch?
You know, I am the first to say that our profession has failed the population, the legal profession. We should never allow our legal differences in terms of the interpretation of the law, its function and purpose, to reach the stage where we start attacking decisions because we don't like them. Every lawyer loses a case at some stage. The way to deal with that is you appeal. If you're not successful in appeal, you appeal again to the CCJ, you're not successful, and then you examine, well, what are the underlying issues here? When we get into either these personal or these very hostile attacks on each other, attacks on the judiciary, etc., we lower every single aspect of the legal system. We don't lower the judges alone. We don't lower the lawyers alone. We lower ourselves. We lower the litigants, and it becomes no different from an argument in a fish market. We should at least have a commitment to not just the rule of law, but to how we deal with our differences. And that's what's so lacking in Guyana's politics and in everything else. David, you and I don't have to agree on anything at all, but at least let us agree on how we are going to address our differences, and that it does not have to be in a vulgar, personalized manner, which has no hope of any successful outcome. And so we are in real toxic circumstances here, to the extent that I don't know who is going to rise out of this and say, hey, look, we've gone too far. This has gone too far. Because we are. I don't want to say nobody ever reaches the point of no return. It's just a question of how long it will take you to return from where you are. No country ever dies. If people don't die, we will continue. The question is how long it's going to take you and what it's going to take. And do we have the leaders who have the human resources, the soul, to be able to say, let's rise above this. This is how we deal with it. I don't want to comment on what exists, but I certainly don't think that one of the ways to do this is to say, look, we don't want the CCJ dealing with certain matters.
Yeah. We've been in the forefront of Caribbean integration. Guyana's always been the leader. My colleagues, academics in the rest of the Caribbean, always say, we quarrel in our country about CARICOM, and you never hear Guyanese quarrel about CARICOM. And I'm afraid that we've entered into a very, very terrible place. Let me ask you this, Nigel. You were out front very early. And I know this because we in Buxton invite you every year at 1st of August to that lecture. We have been able to do it because of the pandemic. And very early when the talk of oil came up, I remember you at Buxton sounding the warning. Very early, long before the Kaieteur News people and so on started, you sounded the warning. Do you think the coming of oil is the biggest challenge for independence at this point of time?
The way I'd want to respond to that is this. Lottery, classic example. People win $100 million. And if you look at the data on it, 80% of the people that win large lottery sums end up broke after 5-10 years. So the question is not the money, it is how you manage the money. So your question really is, do we as a people or do we individually have the capacity to manage at this point in time the wealth that comes with oil? And also, more importantly, forget the money. Do we have the ability to, one, understand the global politics that comes with oil? Because oil is such an important global commodity that you have to be able to at least understand it before you can begin to navigate it. And that is the real fear, because we got this bonanza, but if we don't understand the politics of oil, and countries that have much longer civilizations than us, Iran, if you go back to the Kush people all the way 2,000 years, look where Iran is battling and navigating now, just to make sure that they protect their view of their culture and their civilization. We had an invasion in Iraq. So if we don't understand that this is not a game in which we will have much influence, if any at all, what we have to do is to be able to avoid the real potential consequences of the global politics of oil. And I don't get the sense, with the greatest respect to all the politicians, that they really understand the global politics of oil. There's no such thing as permanent friends and principles. It is the question of whom at a particular point in time in history may be able to deliver, could best serve your ends. And so we have to understand the political objectives of the real global masters to be able to at least protect for Guyana what is best for it, so that at least we could begin to develop a society that, we are a young nation, a society that will last, that has underlying principles that are robust and that can survive. And I don't think we understand the world politics of oil. And that is the greatest threat for me, from where I sit.
And Nigel, we're coming down on time. And this is an introduction. The audience is saying that I have to have you back on a full program. I know you're a busy man. I have not bothered you before because every case that comes up, I see Nigel Hughes is there, and I said, my God, I will be taking advantage if I call Nigel.
Let me just say this.
Yeah.
The cases that make it to the press, the Henry Boys, the others, I really wish those circumstances never came. But every time, God willing, I have the ability to help somebody who may not be able to help themselves, and my skills, small as it may be, can assist, I will be there. It is my commitment. So don't ever feel that you burden me. There are other people that are equally committed. I get lucky, I suppose I got the publication, but I think that's where that is. So insofar as I can share and help, I am always available.
Certainly, thank you very much. And that sentiment is a very deep Rodneyite sentiment, as you said. You walk behind Walter Rodney, who feel that coming from where we come from, it's imperative that we give back. Those of us who have been lucky to be educated and to become professionals, that it's not about choosing. For Rodney, it is logical that we give back, and the notion of the organic intellectual. I'm fixing here. Thanks, Nigel, for keeping that tradition alive in Guyana, because it has very, very deep roots in Guyana, the Caribbean. As we go, there's a captive audience. They've stayed with us for over 2.5 hours. Talk to them about this juncture, this 55th year of independence. What's your message to them?
Well, David, nationally, I think we are all collectively embarrassed about where we are after 55 years. Absolutely, across the board. We are perhaps, I wasn't here in the late 50s and early 60s when we had the virtual civil war, but we are in the most racially toxic atmosphere that I have had since I have been conscious, and I've been around since the 60s. This is the most racially toxic. We are also at a time when the leadership or political leadership does not appear to have the tools to manage this. So before, whether you like Burnham or not, you had a strong person in office who his personal conviction was it would never get to that stage of no return. When Dr. Jagan got in, you could probably argue you had a person there who would not allow it to get to the stage. Right now, we are in our most toxic. Every woman and man for themselves, and we just have to look at any other society historically that has got to this stage to see what can happen. It could be something as simple as a car accident. Every car accident between two different races in Georgetown is a potentially explosive situation. All you need, just look at the Henry Boys. Brutal murder, awful murder, not solved. The victims believe that there's now a charade where the wrong people have been served. And so people feel that the system offers no redress. That is hopelessness. And if you look at what happens in societies when people get close to hopelessness, things fall apart. So after 55 years, things are falling apart, and we don't appear to have the leadership. And I say political because that's just how our society is. You know, we're in the civil society that either have the will or, more importantly, the capacity to pull it back. So it means we are going to go through a cycle of really bad relations, worse than the crime wave. And I don't mean necessarily that type of violence, but worse. And this toxicity that exists is going to get worse. We are going to be relatively stagnant, which means that we're not going to see progressive development in the creative sense. And I'm talking about people making money. People will always make money. I mean, people make a lot of money in crises. But as a nation, we haven't got that. And I hear everybody saying, one people, one nation, one destiny. My question is this. We need to first ask ourselves and have a conversation as to whether or not we want to live together. Most people will say yes. And if we want to live together, exactly how you envisage living together. Because I could say, David, me and you could live together, but I got to be sitting on top of you. Then, they ain't working. So we have to have that conversation. Because everybody say, yeah, we don't want to live together. But what is your view of living together? What does it mean on the economic front? Does it mean that all the resources, or 80% of the resources, are in one sector of the economy? That the children that are born in another sector don't have the opportunity to move up? These are real issues. And if we don't address them, where we have not been addressing them, we get to where we are now. This is not going to get better in the short term. And so just look around the world to see what happens.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thanks for answering the call tonight. And we'll have you back for a more extensive discussion with some of the things you raised and some of the other things that I know that are on your mind. Thank you very much.
It's always a privilege and a pleasure, brother.
Yes, thanks.
Ashe.
And thank you all the audience for staying with us. You're very lively. I've not been able to pay much attention to the audience tonight, but I'm reading some of the comments. As usual, you encourage me to press on. I completely agree that we have reached the moment in our independence that requires the kind of seriousness. And that is why on this program, I am about seriousness. That people come on here, we engage in serious discussions. We may disagree. That is why, although I belong to the WPA, this is not a WPA program. I have 10 panelists tonight. One was WPA. Because I want to set an example that we are a diverse people. And we can become the great nation that we want to become if we engage and entertain our diversity. If we don't believe that all of us have to be PNC or AFC in order for us to do well. People have to be comfortable where they are ideologically, but be able to join hands and join hearts to achieve our goal. It's not just our ethnic diversity that needs fixing. It's our ideological diversity that needs fixing. We say we are one people. Actually, we are several peoples attempting to forge one nation with one destiny. It is that we are one people that led the president to say all of us came here to seek betterment. We're not one people. We're a diverse society with several peoples with different history, coming at different times, coming under different circumstances. The challenge of our independence is how we bring those several diverse peoples together as one nation. One people assumes we are one nation and that we have one destiny. Several people, once we get that in our heads, we are several diverse peoples who are here trying to forge a nation with a common destiny, not one destiny, but a common destiny that includes the destinies of all of them. That if you're Indian Guyanese, your destiny must be wrapped up in the Guyanese destiny. And if you're African Guyanese and Amerindian and Portuguese, you must see your destiny in the Guyanese destiny. It is what will make our nation and our destiny powerful. If we recognize, as Nigel Hughes says, we don't have to agree. I'm a radical. I don't believe in reform. I believe that we have to have radical change. Radical means the root. We didn't want to reform slavery. We wanted to overthrow slavery. That is why if you find some of us who come out of the African Guyanese community more radical, it's because our lives depended on radicalism. And so I'm a radical. But I realize that radical change is not always the best way to go. And so I'm prepared to work with those who want to reform. But when the reformist wants to say that my radicalism has no place, or the radicals want to say the reformist ideas don't have no place, we're not doing any business. The radicals, like myself, I believe in revolution. But I know that you can't make revolution every day. I know the Americans are not going to allow you to make revolution. It's a hard road to revolution. And so it's about the revolutionaries, the reformists, the conservatives, all of us coming together and combining the best and to come up with that center, come up with that thing that will move us to the next stage. And that's my message for this independence. I think this panel tonight gives me hope. Gives me hope. I listen to those young people, and I don't care which party they come from. I listen to them, and I am energized to go for another day. Go for another day. There are times people like myself become depressed. You've been in this thing since you were 15 years old. 4 decades later, going on to 5 decades later, you're wondering, am I going to see a Guyana that responds to the aspirations of all our people? Am I going to see a Guyana where the poverty that I was born in and grew up in no longer is there? One of my favorite hymns when I used to go to church, it used to be 217 in the Anglican hymnal. The numbers must be changed now. When comes the promised time, when war shall be no more, and lust, oppression, crime shall flee thy face before. Was one of my favorite hymns, hymn 217 in the Anglican hymnal. It changed up now because the hymn book, when I go to church now, I can't make it now. Then comes the promised time that war shall be no more, and lust, oppression, crime shall flee thy face before. That is what I want to see in my Guyana. And there are times when I'm fearful. But tonight, we live to fight another day. Because these young people on tonight and the elders synchronizing with them says that we can do it. It's a hard road to travel, Jimmy Cliff says. Many rivers to cross, but I can't seem to find my way over. Sometimes And maybe at this point, we're there. But once we cross this river, I think we're going to make it. And we have to cross this river. We are in serious times. And as a radical, I say like Jimmy Cliff, the harder they come, the harder they fall. One and all. The harder they come, the harder they fall. That's my resistant motto to you. The harder they come, the harder they fall. Confronting those who want to hold our independence back. That's the revolution that I'm talking about. Good night, everybody. Thanks, Sustain. I love you all because we don't say that enough. I love Black people. I love Guyanese. I love Caribbean people. Love. We political people don't talk about love enough. And that is why I am passionate. People like me are passionate because we love. We love our people. I love my people and I make no apologies for that. Part of my identity is Black and I love Black people. We don't get enough love from the world. We don't get enough love from the people we invest in. They become rich and mighty. Move away from us. I love Guyanese because that is part of my identity. I am a Guyanese. I love Guyanese. When I look at Shimron Etmaya with a bat in his hand, and the magician he becomes, I gotta love him. I love him. He comes from deep within our Guyanese and Caribbean belly. He's going through some challenges right now, but we got to stand by him. I'm going to talk about that on one of my programs. Clive Lloyd went through it, and Burnham brought Clive Lloyd back in 1973 when the West Indies Cricket Board wanted to turn their backs on him. Burnham brought him back. 1973, I was a little boy, and the rest is history. He has gone on to become the greatest West Indies captain. Meyer is going through the same changes. We got to talk about it. David Rudder said, Caribbean man, yak, yak, yak. That's the root of our problem. Sometimes we throw out the baby with the bathwater. So I am hopeful, and I hope you are hopeful. Thank you much.